We need to take responsibility at the community and local level rather than simply solving every problem by spending more and more federal dollars.
I not only share it, but I enthusiastically endorse it. It has to be all of us working together, not pointing fingers at each other, but working together.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary Carson, for being here today. I'm over here. We've had some discussion today about the choice vouchers, and many public housing agencies have wait lists. In my district in Charlotte, North Carolina, Mecklenburg, we've got more than 30,000 people who are on the wait list for a housing choice voucher. That includes women and children and families, people with disabilities, seniors, young people, and the list goes on. Just if you can just give me a yes or no to this, because I have a couple other questions. Do you believe that the federal government is dedicating enough funding and resources to ensure that individuals who are most in need of housing can access an affordable place to live?
Would I love to be able to give a lot more? Of course.
Okay, thank you. So given the severe shortage of public housing and federal rental assistance, why did the budget request for FY 2020 zero out programs like CDBG, Public Housing Capital Fund, Home, and you only asked for $8.7 billion less than 2019?
Because we have to make tough choices in a budget, because we have a $22 billion deficit, debt, and we have children and grandchildren and people who will be coming after that who will be responsible for that. So real compassion includes them as well.
Okay. So is there any, when we talk about the housing choice vouchers, was there any reason that you didn't ask for more funding for that?
For exactly the same reason.
Okay.
Would I love to be able to have enough for everybody to have one? That'd be great.
Okay, let me ask this question in terms of the vouchers. We have, in 2016, we had 127 people in Charlotte that received the voucher. 45 of those expired. So that means that individuals who were searching for housing, they were doing that for 120 days, because I understand it's 4 months. And so they're going to have to give them back. They've been turned away because landlords and property managers don't want to rent to folks with Section 8 vouchers. And so I think that there may be some income source discrimination. I think that's unfair, and that's simple. It's just plain and simple that that's unfair. So given this data, do you believe that we need a federal law prohibiting this income discrimination?
I think we certainly need to be looking at what are the impediments for people to accept those vouchers, and that's exactly what we're doing right now. If we go through that process and it's still a problem, maybe a federal law may be necessary.
Okay, what about in terms of the folks who are having to give them back? Is there a way to extend the time frame? I mean, 4 months obviously is not enough in some cases.
There are hardship exemptions in existence which can be utilized in those situations.
Okay, since I've got a few more minutes, since you've rolled back the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, what specific actions is HUD currently taking to ensure its guarantees are fulfilling their fair housing obligations to tackle segregation and housing discrimination?
Well, when I took office, there were 602 discriminatory actions. We're down to about 100 now. We've gone through all of those. And in addition to taking care of the new ones that have come in, we get about 8,000 a year. So we have been extremely active in pursuing those. And I've made it very clear to all of the organizations, if anybody knows of discriminatory activity that's going on that we're not already addressing, please let us know.
Okay. Have you received any complaints at this point?
Like I said, we get about 8,000 a year, and we deal with them as they come in.
Okay. Do you know about how many you've resolved?
The resolution is about 80%.
Okay. Thank you. Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Still, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Waters, and thank you, Secretary Carson, for coming today. I want to talk to you about opportunity zones.
Okay.
In southeast Wisconsin, we have a handful of opportunity zones, in particular in the cities of Janesville, Racine, and Kenosha. There's a lot of opportunity in these opportunity zones, and people are quite excited about the possibilities that they bring to bring rejuvenation into these cities. Could you comment on what you're working on at HUD in supporting qualified opportunity fund investments in housing?
Yeah, we actually have a lot of components that are working on this. For instance, when it comes to economic empowerment and development, the Commerce Department is spearheading the activity. When it comes to entrepreneurship, small business is spearheading the activity. When it comes to education and workforce development, both the Labor Department and Education Department. When it comes to safe communities and environmental concerns, the Department of Justice is spearheading that. And when it comes to assessment of what's going on and measurement, the Council of Economic Advisors is spearheading that. So we have a number of different spearheads tackling the problem.
I appreciate that, and I would ask you if your schedule permits some time to come to Southeast Wisconsin and explore firsthand what opportunity these opportunity zones present to some of the communities in the area that I have the privilege of being a voice for.
I would love to. I've been there before, Racine in particular, at SC Johnson. Good things going on there.
We would love to have you back. I want to shift gears in my limited time and talk about state and local barriers to development. And so, Secretary Carson, many of my colleagues seem to believe that the answer to our housing is simply in the amount of money we spend. But I think we're coming to a bipartisan consensus in it's emerging that we're recognizing also the role of state and local barriers to development, in particular those that are restricting access to housing. Right. Strict land use laws in places in particular like New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles are making it hard to deliver affordable housing. And this is pricing low-income families out of their neighborhoods. It makes it hard for the striving young people to move to a place where jobs are actually plentiful. Can you talk about the high regulatory costs and how it's making it harder for HUD and local housing authorities to serve those in need?
Yeah, well, you know, when you look at zoning regulations, for instance, you take a place like Los Angeles, 70 to 80% of the land is zoned for single-family housing with a certain amount of property. And then you throw on top of that all the regulatory barriers, including recently the need for some solar input. Are you kidding me? This just piles up, and that's why you see people who make $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year living on the street in tents. This can be resolved, but it needs to be resolved with federal, state, and local authorities. I understand that Mayor Garcetti has recently begun to look at allowing accessory dwelling units, and which will certainly help the situation. Those are the kinds of things, though, that we have to be looking at. We can, as I said before, we can solve this problem. If we don't make it political, let's just use what we have and solve it.
I appreciate those comments. It's an incredibly important topic, and we need to continue to look at the local aspect of these land zoning rules that are driving up the cost of housing in very particular communities in the United States. And I appreciate your time today. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Gottheimer, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Waters, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today.
Thank you.
One of the issues that I'm particularly focused on is the tightening of the credit box. I know that you and my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, we all agree that we need to expand access to credit in a responsible manner so that those who deserve to be in a home can be. We also know that HUD plays a critical role in getting people in homes. Secretary Carson, in your opinion, what's the biggest factor that has caused the credit box to shrink, and what is HUD doing to combat it?
Fear, I think, risk, fear of risk, and looking at things that have happened historically. What are we doing about it? We're trying to expand the number of people who give credit by alleviating some of their anxiety. I just mentioned what we were doing with the False Claims Act,
Right.
so that we can bring more people who can provide credit into the market.
Are you seeing a shift?
I think it's starting to shift, absolutely. It's going to take a while, for people to trust what's going on, but they will see over the course of time that we're consistent.
Thank you. And also, I was hoping to ask you about a specific extension of credit and expand. You've started to talk about this, and I guess just one level down on the Federal Housing Authority loans, right, which you've covered. In your testimony specifically, you said that you've noticed a greater number of borrowers looking for FHA loans with higher debt and lower credit scores, and HUD is using closer scrutiny before issuing these mortgages to mitigate risk. How is HUD currently working to strike a balance between promoting access to credit via FHA loans and managing risk?
Well, we're trying to look at data and using that rather than just using, ideology when it comes to issuing credit. That really comes back from my days in medicine, where evidence made a lot of difference. And that's the difference between the fact that at the last turn of the century, before 2000, the average age of death was in the 50s. And at 2000, it was approaching 80s. The main difference is that the medical profession began to use evidence in their policy, and it made a huge difference in our longevity.
And when you said closer scrutiny in your testimony, is that using the data? How are we using the data differently? How has that process changed, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, you look at you look at best practices. You look at things that have worked in some areas, and you say, why is that working? You try to dissect that out, and then you see if you can make that more broadly applicable.
Great, and thank you very much for your time today. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gooden, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary Carson. Is there anything you haven't talked about today you'd like to discuss?
Oh boy, that opens up a big box. But I will tell you the thing that I am most concerned about is the affordability of housing. We have more than 8 million families in the United States who pay more than 50% of their income for housing. And, we need to really focus a lot of attention on that and get this problem solved.
Do you think spending more money will solve that problem?
Spending more money is not the solution. Again, getting to the etiology of the price increases and what can we do that will enable us to build more housing, that more affordable housing.
Several of my colleagues have mentioned you've been inaccessible. Have you met with leadership of this committee and with my colleagues across the aisle to discuss their ideas?
I have tried. The chairwoman has not had time to meet with me, but I've met with several other members, and we've made some good progress.
Well, I would encourage those discussions to continue, and I thank you for your work and the hard work you've done at your organization and for what's to come. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. Wexton, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary Carson, for joining us here today. As you may be aware, the House last week passed the Equality Act, which includes a lot of broad protections for the LGBTQ community, but for our purposes, one of the things I'm most pleased about is that we are explicitly including the LGBTQ community as a part of the Fair Housing Act's non-discrimination protections. Do you agree with this inclusion?
Well, I certainly agree with non-discrimination and with being fair to every single individual in our society.
So so you would approve of the inclusion of LGBTQ community as a part of the Fair Housing Act's protections, explicitly protecting them from discrimination in housing?
If you want to include them as one of the protected classes, I think that is something that Congress will be responsible for.
Very good. And I guess one of your responsibilities would have to do with the rulemaking and the rules for HUD and inclusion within HUD, is that correct?
And our responsibility is to make sure everybody is treated fairly.
And in March 2017, your agency removed links to key resource documents informing emergency shelters on best practices for serving transgender people facing homelessness, and you withdrew a proposed policy that would have required HUD-funded emergency shelters to post notice to residents to inform them of their rights to be free of anti-LGBTQ discrimination under HUD regulations, right?
We are creating a situation where there is more local jurisdictional control.
But you removed that guidance from the site, and it has not been replaced.
That's correct.
Okay. And last month, while you were testifying before the House Appropriations Subcommittee about HUD's withdrawal of these guidance documents, you said that they were not needed and that the equal access rule was in place. Is that correct?
The rules from 2012 and 2016 adequately provide for fairness for all communities.
So those rules are still in place?
Yes, they have not been removed.
Okay. And you also stated we have not made any attempt to change them. Is that correct?
We have not changed any of the rules.
And that was the case when you testified in appropriations. Is that still the case today?
It's still the case today.
Okay. And can you assure this committee that you will not make any, that HUD does not have any current or future plans to eliminate the equal access rule in rulemaking?
I'm not going to say what we will do in the future about anything. We don't know what we're going to do in the future.
Are you currently anticipating doing that?
I'm not currently anticipating changing the rule.
Well, what has your agency done to ensure that the equal access rule is implemented and that recipients of HUD funding are aware of their responsibilities under the equal access rule?
We have left the rules up from 2012 and 2016, and we have made it very clear that we will continue to enforce fairness for everyone. And when something is brought to our attention that is not fair, we will deal with it.
So you're not being proactive, you're just going to be reactive on this issue?
We are being very proactive in terms of making sure that discrimination is not occurring.
But
As I
Secretary
told
Carson,
you,
you just testified that you took down the guidance, right?
It
has not been-
the guidance was not necessary. The guidance was providing a lot of regulatory input, federal thumb on everything, as opposed to allowing local jurisdictions to make their rules based on the 2012 and the 2016.
So you don't think it's appropriate for HUD to do that at the national level?
Not on that issue, no.
Okay. So you have removed the guidance. You testified that you have no plans to eliminate the equal access rule, but you're also not proactively enforcing it. You're waiting for complaints to filter their way up to HUD, and then you'll deal with it. Is that what you're saying?
No, one of the things that I'm saying is if you want to do something different about the definition of gender, that is a congressional duty.
Thank you. I have no further questions. I'll yield back.
The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Riggleman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member McHenry. Secretary Carson, I appreciate you taking the time to answer all of our questions today. Having escaped poverty and lived in public housing, you certainly bring an important perspective to many of the housing challenges we're facing today, and we are grateful to have you here. In your June 28 testimony before the Financial Services Committee, you mentioned the issue of the FHA having to deal with what you called very archaic IT. Just last Thursday, HUD received a Federal Information Technology Innovation Award for advancements in data analytics digital transformation, which I'm a little bit familiar with.
Thank you.
Could you expound on some of the things HUD has been working on over the last year to modernize old IT systems? And secondly, in your opinion, what specific things still need to be done in order to bring HUD's IT programs up to date?
Well, you know, still a lot of our platforms are 40 years old, so technology's been left behind. But what we have done is been able to create a dashboard that gives us real-time information about where our grant money is and how it's being spent. And this allows us to provide more flexibility to the various jurisdictions. So that's something that I'm very excited about. In FHA, you know, thanks to Congress, we've been able to at least start updating, you know, our information technology platforms. It's going to take, you know, quite a bit more, and but we're getting there, and that's the important thing, because, you know, we don't want to fall behind all the other servicers, and that puts a lot of taxpayer money at risk, but it also makes us inefficient, and that's something that we want to change as quickly as possible.
Thank you, because I think 40 years ago I was playing Pong, so I'm glad that you say there's some advancements going on here. So thank you for that. And another topic I would like to address are opportunity zones, and the reason there is because I have the biggest district in Virginia. It's actually bigger than 6 states. It's bigger than New Jersey. And we have the most, even though we have one of the 11 districts, I think we have 18% of the opportunity zones throughout the entire state. They were created under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 to stimulate economic growth and job creation. Could you discuss some of the things HUD is doing to incentivize, as far as incentivizing economic growth in low-income communities through opportunity zones? And do you see the criteria for designating opportunity zones changing or expanding in the future?
Yeah, you know, we're providing preference points for people who are willing to go into opportunity zones. And, you know, you can buy something there, you can build something there, you can invest in something there. There are a number of mechanisms that you can utilize. We're also providing expertise, people who can help people create programs that will attract other resources into the area, and ways to partner with entities that already exist within the opportunity zone.
And as everybody knows already, I'm very supportive of opportunity zones, especially with the 5th District of Virginia having so many. And we don't have a lot of time, but I think I have one more question here. And I thank you again very much for answering these questions. Over the last several years, we've seen a dramatic increase in natural disasters. In my district particularly, we've been affected by multiple hurricanes and flooding. In your opinion, how would you rate HUD's response to the most recent disasters?
Well, we've had an unprecedented number of disasters since I became the HUD secretary. I hope I haven't caused them, but the fact of the matter is, I think the response has been good. I'm never satisfied with it. That's why I'm always asking, is there something else we can be doing to get these funds out faster? But do recognize that HUD is the long-term entity when it comes to a disaster. SBA, FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, those are the short-term responders. Having said that, I still want to speed the process up. So the whole concept of codification in certain arenas is a good concept. Taking out unnecessary steps, a very good concept. And I would personally like to get it down to, you have a disaster, 6 months, you've got everything you need.
Thank you, Secretary Carson, very much, and I yield my time.
Okay.
The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Porter, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Carson. Are you in favor or opposed to adjusting the interest curtailment penalty schedule for FHA loans that are in default?
I don't know that I can say broadly. I think you.
Well, I'm asking you to state specifically.
I think you got to look at specific cases. In some cases, I might be in favor of it. In some cases, I might not.
Okay, do you know what the interest rate curtailment schedule is at FHA and how it's different from the GSEs?
Well, we tend to try to maintain a lower interest rate at FHA.
I'm not asking you
because
about
we're
the
trying to
interest rate, sir. I'm asking you about debenture interest curtailment penalties.
Explain.
So, all right, so FHA uses different servicing and conveyance procedures than the GSEs do. And the result of this is that the cost of servicing, mortgage servicing at FHA for a non-performing mortgage is 3 times the cost of doing the equivalent servicing at the GSEs for a non-performing loan. That tripling of cost in servicing, which then has the effect of reducing the credit availability to the American people, because when you drive up servicing costs, then servicers overlay with cost overlays, and it makes the loans more expensive for the very homeowners that FHA is designed to serve. So my question I'm trying to drive at here is, why is FHA, to use a term that I think we can both understand, lousy at servicing mortgages?
Okay, I have not had any discussions about that particular issue, but I will look it up, find out what's going on.
So as you look it up, I'd also like you to get back to me, if you don't mind, to explain the disparity in REO rates. Do you know what an REO is?
An Oreo?
No, not an Oreo, an REO, REO.
Real estate?
What's the O stand for?
E-organization?
Owned, real estate owned. That's what happens when a property goes to foreclosure. We call it an REO. And FHA loans have much higher REOs. That is, they go to foreclosure rather than to loss mitigation or to non-foreclosure alternatives like short sales than comparable loans at the GSEs. So I'd like to know why we're having more foreclosures that end in people losing their homes with stains to their credit and disruption to their communities and their neighborhoods at FHA than we are at the GSEs.
I would be extremely happy if you'd like to have you work with the people who do that.
Well, Mr. Carson, respectfully, that was my day job before I came to Congress. So now it's my job to ask you to work with the people.
I'm talking about the people at HUD who do that.
I've spent a decade working with the people at HUD on this problem. So what I would like you to do is to take this back to FHA and to ask the folks at FHA, because since 2007, I have been writing about the problems in FHA's servicing. I am a huge fan of FHA. I am a believer in their mission, and I am a champion for them. Are you?
Of course, I believe in the mission of FHA.
Are you a champion for the institution, the organization?
Very much so.
Okay, so let me make sure you understand. When a loan, the most common outcome for an FHA loan that goes into default is REO. There's a conveyance process. Are you familiar with this?
I know about the conveyance.
All right, so let me ask you about conveyance. What actions is HUD taking to change the conveyance process at FHA to address the loss recovery differential between FHA loans and GSE loans?
Well, again, you're getting way down in the weeds here. And
yeah, because it's real American people are out of their houses, so they are literally in the weeds when they are foreclosed on.
Understood. And I'm very happy to put you in contact with the people who deal with that. If I got down in the weeds on every issue, I wouldn't get very far.
Okay, appreciate it, but this has been a problem for years. The Urban Institute issued a major report on this, and I will be happy to send you a copy.
I appreciate you bringing it to my attention.
I want to make sure let me ask you this. Given these problems, the outcome is that FHA is the leading cause of blighted homes in the United States. What can you do about that? Do you understand the relationship between the blight and the servicing problems?
Well, I understand that blight is a huge problem and that
it comes from your agency's inaction on servicing.
I'm not sure that I'm willing to accept that FHA is the cause of all the blight that we have.
I hope you feel differently after you read the report. Thank you.
Gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Garcia, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Secretary Carson, thank you for being here with us today and engaging us in conversations about HUD. I want to begin with a proposal pending before this committee, known as the Safe Housing and Families Act. It recognizes and seeks to take action in the aftermath of 13 deaths that have occurred in federally subsidized housing since 2003, including as recently as February when Anthony and Gwendolyn Fleming died of carbon monoxide poisoning at Hickory Hollow Cooperative, a HUD-subsidized housing complex in Wayne, Michigan, near to your childhood home. The Flemings' death were the third and fourth deaths to occur this year. Since April, as you know, HUD has been developing a rule to put an end to these preventable deaths by requiring CO2 detectors in public housing, but it could be many months before that rule is finalized as the process goes. On Friday, a story ran on NBC News website in which a HUD spokesperson is quoted as saying, quote, "Congress can fix this by passing legislation requiring carbon monoxide detectors for those living in HUD housing units where detectors are needed." Secretary Carson, that legislation is before this committee today. This is that public hearing. The Safe Housing for Families Act would codify the rules so that you are developing into law and would provide $10 million in funding over 10 years to carry out the objective of stopping avoidable deaths like the ones I mentioned. This is double the amount that HUD announced yesterday would be made available. Secretary Carson, would you support the Safe Housing for Families Act?
As I've mentioned to you in the past, I am 100% for getting this carbon monoxide issue settled, and I appreciate your help in helping getting that done. And as quickly as we can get it done, it's going to get done.
Great. Thank you, Secretary. I accept your endorsement. Changing gears and returning back to a topic we were discussing previously, the mixed status rule, I'd like to share with you a story about Joyce Bell. She was raised in Chicago and has always struggled to have clean, green, safe, and affordable housing. She's